Hi, everyone. I'm Deanna Niebuhr, the California Policy and Programs Director at the Opportunity Institute, and I'm honored and excited to be facilitating this conversation with our panel on ensuring a just recovery for all students. Let me start by introducing our panelists. We have Taryn Ishida, the Executive Director of Californians for Justice, which is also a part of the California Partnership for the Future of Learning, and Kamarie Brown, a student at Los Angeles Unified School District and also a member of the school board there. Welcome, Kamarie. And finally, we have Matthew Schneck, a high school history teacher who teaches in downtown San Diego. So to introduce our topic, we can really only start this discussion by acknowledging that the most devastating effects of the pandemic have fallen overwhelmingly on low-income and Black and Brown communities, and that heaped on top of this, the existing inequities in education only got worse. But the fact of this only underlined the importance, responsibility, and opportunity to move forward and double down on bold policies for racial justice. Now, as students and teachers return to in-person learning, we see that the California state and local leaders have listened to student and community groups to prioritize their needs and are now backing this with funding to ensure that students and families have the support they need in a holistic way. California is making bold investments in education and other supports, and we're excited to hear today from community leaders who helped shape some of these asks and also led local efforts to lift up equity and student and community needs. We're going to be talking about statewide movements like a new framework for a restorative restart to school and how that framework links to the community schools approach. We're also going to be talking about what it was like to be in school this past year and the local change efforts like the Student Equity Needs Index at LA Unified. So as we come out of the pandemic and start to heal, we can harness this moment of incredible disruption to move toward a reimagining of what school can and should be. Okay, with that, let's get started. For all of you out in the audience, we're going to do our best to make this a conversation. Please put your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and our panelists will start with opening remarks, but we'll do our best to get back to your questions. Also, our panelists are going to be asking questions of each other. So on to our panelists. Taryn, can we start off with you?
Yes, thank you, Deanna. Good morning, everyone. I want to start by thanking you all for being here. I know it is a lot going on in the world, in your lives. So you joining a Zoom today here at the water cooler, I'm really glad you're here, and I'm confident this session with all of us here is going to leave you fired up and hopefully feeling connected to a bigger movement, right? A bigger movement that is working to reimagine and rebuild more racially just schools. So I want to take us back a little bit. Do you remember what was going on for you right before school shut down over a year ago? Right? I do. Just like Jasenia and Vicky, I had just had a baby. I had a newborn. I had a full house. My mom and my brother had moved in with me to shelter in place together. So not only was I worried about my family's well-being, but I was worried. I was really worried about the young people that Californians for Justice organizes with. Every day we would hear from more and more of our student leaders who were sharing their struggles. So much anxiety about what was happening, their family members losing jobs, worried about whether they could feed their families, house their families. Educators in schools were scrambling just to try to support students and figure out their own lives, right? I'd be hearing all these challenges working alone in my bedroom next to the baby's crib, and it felt so overwhelming. So what did I do? I took a breath. And so I want to invite all of us to do that right now from wherever you are. Take a big breath, inhale. and let it all out. And I just want to encourage all of us to do this, right, in the months ahead of us, because this isn't easy. But when I took that breath, the next thing I knew I needed to do was to call my friends in this movement, right, that we are creating. I called Angelica from Public Advocates. I think you're here in the audience, Angelica. I don't know if you remember, but we were on that video call talking to each other. What are you hearing from students and families? What's going on in other parts of the state? And the whole time we had our kids in the background trying to get our attention because we didn't have childcare figured out yet, right? And then we realized we got to talk to our friends too. So we reached out to Sergio from ICUC in the Inland Empire, to Tere from Sacramento ACT, Corey from Community Coalition, where Kamarie comes from, right? Down in South LA, Inner City Struggle in East LA. We called Katie from Faith in Action in Oakland, she called Terry from True North in Humboldt. So I'm just telling you this because these are the homies, right? In a matter of 2 weeks, y'all, we heard through these relationships, we heard from 600 students and parents, all from low-income communities of color, from 20 different districts across the state, right? And then we did a second round of targeted outreach to hear from foster youth, system impacted youth, special education, students who are immigrants or English learners. And then we were able to analyze all of those conversations to come up with these 5 top needs. And I want to show them to you now. This is a year ago, and I want to show them because I want to see how you all think we've come. How well have we actually addressed these needs, okay? So as you look at them, kind of put that hat on. So I think, let's see. All right, you should be able to see my screen, yeah? So this was the 5 needs we identified from that process of 600 students and families, right? Every school, every community beyond COVID-19. So number 1, we need more mental health support, belonging, and relationships. You heard that from Linda Darling-Hammond. One of our students from Oakland said she's concerned about food, jobs, money, her education. Racism towards Asian Pacific Islander folks, right, is a big concern for us too. She missed being around her friends, feeling really, really depressed, but not even being able to tell her family. Access to equitable learning opportunities. I'm going to read this quote from a district staff. This person told us, students with overlapping and intersecting needs need special attention. I'm doing wellness checks with families and discovering foster youth and English learners with IEPs, but they haven't heard from resource teachers yet. Caregivers need bilingual support, and a general education teacher alone won't be able to support these distinct needs. And I think you're going to hear from my panelists about this too, right? Just the superhuman effort we're expecting our school staff to be able to do. Number 3, uncertainty for high school seniors and juniors, particular fears about not being able to graduate, trying to navigate the higher education system, or in this case, we need support for seniors now, one of the students said. The lack of stability in my family is pushing high school and college students to choose between school or getting a job to support their family. And now we know this trend has followed on. There is a huge drop in college attendance, college going rates, and it's particularly affecting low-income Black and Brown students. I'm going to just pause and say, this piece is something that I'm actually really upset about today. I just learned that the governor's proposal to invest in after school and summer and expanded learning, which is amazing. It's $5 billion. But that proposal of $5 billion does not include any funding for middle school or high school students, any funding at all. What happens to these older students? The very students who need safe spaces to build relationships with their adults and peers, who need to be re-engaged just to come back to school, who are at risk to drop out, fuel the school to prison pipeline. And not attending college for these students, for low-income students of color, has huge implications on their generational success and the future success of our state. So I'm bringing this to your attention because I just learned about it and I'm like, what in the world? How do we continue to overlook older students? I started my working career in after school and summer, and the youth that are already in under-resourced communities, I saw them going to a college campus for the first time, or actually finding their love of learning through art, or being out in the environment, or doing hands-on science. It was those after-school and summer programs that were enriching, where they actually found that one caring adult that believed in them. And just to connect this back to what we talked about with community schools, expanded learning is one of the 4 key pillars of community schools. If we don't invest in half the students who need access to expanded learning, we're dooming this possible transformative investment that has so much potential to drive racial justice, to drive relationship-centered education. And just to give you a quick stat, so right now with our expanded learning, about 8% of that funding goes to support high school students. I don't think that's enough. 8% probably not enough. However, the governor's proposal is 0%, right? So we really, we need to fix this, folks, and we still have time, okay? That's why I'm bringing it up today. Okay, I'm gonna get back to the needs assessment. So thanks for bearing with me. The last 2 needs, huge, right? Engaging students and families as partners in decisions now and for the future. And as partners in not just what are the problems we're facing, but also in designing solutions forward. That is really what's gonna unlock transformation in our schools, especially when those students and families are the folks most impacted by the challenges we're facing. And lastly, addressing the intersectional needs of families and students, housing and food insecurity, lack of access to childcare, transportation, folks who are struggling in undocumented or mixed status households in rural communities, right? We need to really take into account the real intersecting needs of students in order to get to that equitable future. So I wanna let you all know, we did these top 5 needs a year ago, right? And at least for Californians for Justice and the California Partnership for the Future of Learning, who pulled this together. In a minute, we'll drop the link where you can learn more about the California Partnership for the Future of Learning. It's a beautiful alliance centered around racial justice, but that has really driven all of our organizing and advocacy at the state and local levels. It's driven the work around investing in community schools and this really bold idea that I think many of you in the audience have been a part of, called a restorative restart to schools, which is basically asking districts to take the first 3 to 6 weeks to focus on these 5 needs, to focus on relationships, holistic supports for students and educators, to make learning racially equitable and engaging, and actually bringing students and families as part of the design team to drive that path towards transformation. So I know many of you are probably working to address these 5 needs, and we want to take a little bit of a poll, if we can cue that up. So since we are in the final stretch of state and local budget adoptions, we want to hear your assessment. How do you think we are doing in meeting the needs of the most vulnerable students and families? And where you all can see the poll pop up, find that little window, and you get to pick 3, okay? So which of these need more attention and investment? All right, and then we are waiting for a few more folks to make their selections. All right, the final 5 seconds, make your pick, and then we will share the results. Okay, so which area needs the most attention or investment? We have mental health and building positive relationships at a tie with equitable learning environments for every student. Coming in the third area is engaging students, parents, and educators as leaders to create solutions. Yes, I'm so glad to hear that. And I know these other two areas are not necessarily that they're less important, but maybe, something for us to dig into a little bit more, right? Right. Just want to appreciate everyone for taking the time to share your thoughts. And I know all of you are doing the work around the state in your local community to help address these needs. And just being here today, again, is what I think is going to help really unlock the power and transformation that we are all aiming for. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Deanna.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Taryn. Kamarie, let's go to you now, and please tell us more about you and your work. Give us a view into the student experience during distance learning. What are some of the specific needs and what it meant for students of color during the pandemic? And share with us your current role at LAUSD and the Community Coalition and what you've been working on and what impact you've helped to make.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So good morning, everybody. My name is Kamarie Brown. I'm a third generation South Central native and a senior at Crenshaw High School. And man, this past year of distance learning has just really been wow for all of us, but disproportionately difficult for communities like mine and other Black and Brown communities where resources and support capacity were already extremely low. I saw some of my college-bound friends fall off because they simply couldn't access the school platforms, having like 6 to 7 family members on a weak Wi-Fi, friends who have had to take on a part-time job or even a full-time job just to support their families on top of being a student. So I just feel like the pandemic erased any doubt that structural inequities in schools create astronomically different outcomes for support for students based on racialized and income-based disparities. And for me, so much of it boils down to material resources, right? And the who and the why resources go to some folks and not others. And that's exactly what led me to join South Central Youth Empowered Through Action about 4 years ago. I mean, become a student organizer with Community Coalition because I really felt it was necessary to build youth power and center youth voices in campaigns and policies that impact students. So since then, I've been a part of developing a strong base of student activists at Crenshaw who together have been pushing for structural changes in LAUSD, not in hopes of repairing a broken system, but to begin like the process of reimagining and creating something new. So when I learned that I could be elected as LAUSD student board member, I jumped at the chance and then boom, I was elected, becoming the first young Black woman to ever hold the position. And I got straight to work. Like no pauses, no nothing. I got straight to work. And something I really wanted to do was create a support culture within our schools and obviously get the resources needed to support student mental health. That's something that I was super big on. That was such a major thing that kept coming up among my peers. The overall sense of loss, sadness, lack of hope, and then now add on the generational trauma, the brutalization by the police, and the continued disinvestment in our youth. So this was the origin for my resolution, Mental Health is Mental Wealth, which we passed unanimously this month. So we wanted not to only ensure that students have access to PSWs and other wellness resources, but also that we begin to move forward and towards a culture of community care and support for our youth. But a lot of this would not be possible without the Equity is Justice Resolution, which is the 2021 Equity is Justice Resolution really is close to my heart because I have been fighting for the Student Equity Need Index since my freshman year. So I'm really inspired to continue the push for equity in our community because it's something that, I can actually, it won't affect my year because I'm a senior about to leave, but just something that, I've been really fighting for since 9th grade and it actually coming to real life. So that's something that I really truly hold dear to my heart. $700 million ain't no pocket change. It will make a huge difference. And as a senior, I'm proud to leave knowing that's something that will support our next generation of students. I have little cousins that's coming up. So just knowing that I did something, or we all did something great for, the little ones coming up after us is just something that is just super duper duper dope. So I'm glad to have been a part of the process. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kamarie. Matthew, let's go to you. Tough act to follow, but can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to be a teacher during the pandemic and distance learning, and what you could see about your students' experience, and the needs that you saw there, and the equity issues you saw come up among your students?
Absolutely. So when schools closed in March 2020, what followed could only be described as crisis teaching. So many teachers will probably tell you it felt like our first year teaching all over again, because we felt like we had no idea what we were doing. And that goes from, not understanding how to close a breakout room and then accidentally ending the entire Zoom call for all of your students. And you're like, oh, okay, that was class, I guess. To trying to figure out how to engage kids in a medium that neither you nor they have really any experience with. Initially, many students kept their cameras off, and talking to a bunch of black boxes kind of feels isolating. And it made it impossible to know how a student was reacting in class. Are they bored? How are they feeling? And it really forced me to try to find ways, okay, if I have all these black boxes, this is like soul sucking. What do I do to get kids to trust me, to want to show me their cameras? And what kind of community building can I do? And even with that, there were still, students that just, they did not want to turn on their cameras. And at the end of the day, I had to respect that. The bigger challenges came more this school year, with the equity issues being pretty glaring. At the start of the year, I had one of my students in Sacramento. Keep in mind, I'm teaching here in San Diego. So one of my students in Sacramento, another in Chicago. I had a few in Baja California, just across the border. And then another that actually, he logged into a Zoom class directly from a tire shop where he was working. I later found out he was working there. A bunch of tires behind him. He heard some drill noises in the background. And it was just like, okay, like kids' lives have been upended. And that was just immediately obvious. Like, my kids are not in San Diego. Like, my kids are everywhere now. And you also had, I also saw a loss of employment, and that meant families, had to move. Lots of siblings, since I teach juniors and seniors, a lot of my students were responsible for taking care of their younger siblings, including even helping them with their own distance learning, at sometimes, to the detriment of their own, or doing their own assignments. Lots of kids at the beginning especially lacked access to the internet. A lot of them, only had their phone's data plan to use, which is insufficient, especially for Zoom. Attendance, while was pretty good in the fall, started to wane, especially now. And just talking to students, they'll tell you that they're losing motivation. And then this one part is, it always gets me. Some experience of some students had problems with motivation, but then other students dealt with tremendous loss. And it's crazy because, you heard those numbers during the surge and how many people are dying in this country. And then it hits you when a kid calls you and says that they need to talk about something. And then they let you know that over sobs that their 55-year-old grandfather, that they live with in a multi-generational household, passed away, that he was on a ventilator for 2 weeks. And it's just that call was just so shocking to me, because one, I didn't know, truthfully, I wasn't sure how to help this kid other than to show compassion and empathy. I don't have the tools. I really don't have the tools necessary to help a kid deal with the passing of a loved one. And really, that experience, though, made me wonder, wait a minute, how many other deaths are happening, right? In my students' lives that they don't feel comfortable telling me. That one student in particular felt comfortable telling me about such a personal thing that affected their everyday life. But of course, there's going to be kids that, don't want to tell me that, and that's fine. But obviously, they're dealing with something that's going to affect their ability to learn at school. And so I think what's really important to underline here is that the pandemic has not impacted all communities equally. So looking specifically at Pacific Islander, Latino, Indigenous, and Black Americans all have COVID-19 death rates that are double or more that of white and Asian Americans who experience the lowest age-adjusted rates. And so what that means as a school community is that students are going to be returning to instruction having experienced trauma. And we are, in going back to how things used to be, simply isn't an option. We have kids, they're going to be coming back in with needs. And we need to find ways to put students' social emotional needs at the forefront of returning, giving space for those kids and for teachers to actually form relationships. I don't think we can just start with, let's just keep going with, academic assignments. Kids are already overwhelmed this year with stuff piling up, and yeah. So I think we're gonna, at least teachers are gonna need to receive some training, because like trauma-informed care, for instance, is really important when you're dealing with children that have experienced trauma. But at the same time, we are going to need to finally appropriately staff our schools in order to have mental resources available for our students.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. So I've been asked to round out our opening remarks by talking a little bit about community schools, but I think what I want to do is punt and go back to you, Taryn, and get into questions, and we'll loop back to community schools as we discuss. But will you pick up kind of where Matthew left off and the needs assessment you did, and talk a little bit more about what came out of that in this kind of bold proposal for a restorative restart and reimagining schools? Like, break that down for us, those 5 elements. And I think the bold part is this: take a pause and do a restorative restart so that we can reimagine. So if you could just help us get our heads around that and get into that thinking.
Okay. Yes. Okay, Emma. I actually am going to show you a little bit, because I know you've been listening for a long time and I always appreciate some visuals. So I'm going to share my screen again. So this is, and you'll get this in the chat if you haven't already, reimaginingcaschools.org. This is a webpage that many of the folks here helped to put together last month. There is a brief about the restorative restart, about this idea of starting schools differently. The first 6 weeks, really having districts and schools offer students, families, and educators a restorative restart, right? What does it mean to not go back to normal? It means to do school really differently, particularly as we start the fall. And so centering relationships, addressing whole child needs, strengthening staffing and partnerships, making teaching and learning relevant and rigorous. And this really is also about race, culture, and language. And then empowering teams to reimagine and rebuild systems. And you've heard me say this throughout, and you can see it, the evidence of it here with Kamarie and Matthew and I. We're not talking about teams of administrators behind doors. We're talking about really multi-stakeholder teams where students and families and educators are coming together to do that hard work of reimagining and rebuilding the school system. This website here, you'll be able to find some really great tools and resources. I particularly love this slide deck, which will point you to great examples of the best practices around homeschool visits, or what does it mean to do culturally relevant curriculum. Some really great resources there. And we have so many awesome partners. I'm going to give them a shout out here because I know many of you are here today. What I love about this bold idea is that something really different and also unprecedented was the amount of collaboration I'm seeing around the state. And this relationship-centered way of partnering, from the classroom all the way to school board meetings, to the state board, to our legislators, our policymaking bodies. that is the kind of relationship-centered partnerships that I think will really unlock transformation. But only if, right? Only if those partnerships are really centered on the people most impacted: Black, Brown, Asian American, Pacific Islander students and families, our educators as well. And I'm going to particularly call out Black students in particular. Kamarie just was on fire, right? And could show what the leadership of Black students in particular can really bring to these conversations to dismantle the white supremacy that our education system has been designed around, right? Because that's really what we're all trying to do here. I think this restorative restart idea is taking shape. I'm hearing Oakland, shout out to Oakland, was the first to adopt this 3 weeks restorative restart, and they're putting their money behind their words. They've allocated at least $15 million, from what I understand, to mental health and a restorative restart that really engages students and families. We just found out in East San Jose, which is right behind me. You can't see them, but that's where my home turf is. East San Jose is also committed to three-week restorative restart wellness centers. And I'm hearing it pop off across the state as well. So I'm excited for this movement. I think for me, the measure of our success is if students go back to school in the fall and school really does feel differently. Their day to day, their hour to hour actually feels like something different. I think that's going to be success for us.
Thank you, Taryn. Kamarie, I want to toss it to you and ask you to kind of react to this restorative restart idea, and maybe from a student leader perspective and a school board member, tell us what you think about how this is possible to move in a school district from a student leader's point of view, and what kind of supports do you need in that role? Sorry if that's a hardball question. You're on mute.
Thank you. I think that like the standard platforms and venues for student engagement are still on like just up there. Youth voices are like an afterthought. And I feel like it should not take us driving like to Sacramento or protesting outside of the district building for folks to hear us and take our voice into consideration, because it's just like, wow. But just keeping in mind that our current public education system has not served Black and Brown youth. We need to be a part of leading the creation of a truly equitable school system. And just as someone who got the opportunity to even sit on the board, I just feel like, just expanding on not like, why do we have to drive all the way to like far? It kind of relates to my story about like which school did I want to go to for high school. And I was just like, I don't feel like I should have to drive, I don't know, wake up at 5:30 to get on the bus to go to a quote unquote good school just so I can get, a good education and whatnot, when I can just go to my home school. So it's kind of like ties hand in hand to that. Why do we have to wake up, or not even wake up to drive to Sacramento? Just like I said, for our voices to be heard. So it's short and sweet, but yeah, I think that we should make it more, I don't know, what's the word? More accessible, easier to access. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you, Kamarie. Matthew, let me put you on the spot too and ask you in this kind of vision, and the job that teachers are going to have to do, that we're all talking about accelerate learning, in this moment of incredible disruption. What is your reaction to this idea of a restorative restart and the possibility of reimagining schools? And what do teachers need, and what perspective do they bring? What do teachers need to make this real and have a voice in making something like this real?
Well, I think starting with making sure that we understand that acceleration means that teachers are not going to, speed through content and cover as much ground as possible, because one, it's just not possible, and you're going to alienate students if you're just packing in assignments or packing in content. And it also means, not remediation, because we've seen how that can be super problematic, and, teaching kids standards from lower grade levels doesn't actually bring them to where they need, it ends up doing more harm than good. So I think we can intentionally support our students. There was a time when we had tutoring was pretty common in schools. I would love, or at least schools here in San Diego, and I would love to see that brought back. It's yet another adult that students can have relationships with, for instance. And then it's also, you know, like it allows you to essentially recruit from, you know, the community where your school is. And so you're more likely to get tutors that look like students that go to the school. I feel like I'm not hitting all of your questions out. There's another piece to that.
I think it's just what's the teacher's perspective on how would you make, what's the need for this restorative restart and reimagining, and how, from a teacher's perspective, what do you need to make something like this happen?
I think for this, the entirety of this pandemic and distance learning, creating relationships has been very difficult. It's difficult to do that on the computer. It's difficult to do that through Zoom. And so a big concern of mine is student social emotional learning. And just if they're not, like there's so many kids that are disconnected from school right now. And they'll tell you like, I'm not motivated. I'm doing it because my mom is making me, but like, they're not connected to school. And so we need to, schools, academics are always going to come, but we really need to focus on building relationships with students, because that has been lacking for an entire or more than a year. Mm-hmm. There's students that I have never even seen at all. Like I don't, other than I don't even know what they look like, except for a picture I've seen from 2 years ago from, you know, Life Touch that took that picture, and it happens to be up in Power School, the student information system. So I think we're all kind of starving to build relationships. That was part of what, I mean, to me, that's the best part of learning, is you build a relationship with someone, and then you feel comfortable asking them questions. You feel comfortable going to them for help. You feel comfortable, I'm not going to meet this deadline, so I'm actually going to go to my teacher and tell them and have a conversation with them. But that's never going to happen unless there's time to build those relationships. And that time is intentional and built into the school day, not an afterthought, not something added on, but built into the school day. And it may require, you know, changing schedules a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So I'll just jump in here and answer the question about, you know, when we're talking about community schools, and how does this ask for, you know, such a big ask and commitment to community schools kind of fit into all of this. And what I'll say about that is that California has a really long history of doing community schools, starting way back in the 90s with its what were called Healthy Start grants, which were very focused on putting together the supports and services to make sure that students and families had everything they need to be successful. And we're absolutely going to double down on this. But what I think, you know, coming out of all of this, and there's a broad array of advocates all asking, you know, making this ask for community schools. And what I would say is, you know, foundational to that ask is that what we're asking for is kind of a more pushed and challenged approach to community schools that starts with relationship building among students, families, and teachers, that school community building, so that students and families and teachers are the owners, the designers of their community schools. And it's this relationship-centered approach that's central to it being a successful school, to it being a place that students learn and thrive, and teachers feel successful working there. So I think it's a bold proposal that we're all making. And you know, I'd like to hear from you guys, just to pitch in, however, whoever wants to make that pitch, that I think this student-centered, this relationship building work, that take a pause to do that. It's not just important because of the trauma we've all experienced, but also because before pandemic, this is the way that learning happens. So if you guys would would maybe just weigh in on that idea of the importance of relationship building. It feels like the most important part of our pitch. So whoever wants to go.
I can. And my final remarks was directly related to that, but I'm totally down to answer that. I think that relationships are essential for learning, and they obviously were largely missing through Zoom. And now that we have this infusion of money into California schools, we can structure time now and space for that relationship building to happen. Learning is best done with people, not for them. And too much of Zoom was just like, let me give you the information. And that's not good teaching. It's not really a relationship. It's just you're sitting there and getting information. So it's more effective when learners get to be participants instead of recipients, meaning that the central element in promoting learning is going to be promoting relationships.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Matthew. Why don't I just have you guys think about that as we get towards closing remarks. We have some questions in the chat that I'll just take in the order that I see them here. So we have one question from Mary Perry. What aspects of the traditional middle school, high school structure and instruction stand in the way of a restorative restart, and what would we change?
I can jump in on that. Kamarie, do you want to answer that? You're the one most recently in high school, so you can we'll add on, jump on after me. Great question, Mary. You know, I think like Matthew said, if we really started from listening to our students and our families and our educators, they would all say what we're saying here on this panel, right? The relationships, the trust and collaboration that we need to build between each other, so we aren't just isolated, and we aren't just going forward with the same old that we've always done. And we finally have that opportunity to do it. Now, if you start from the center of students and families and educators most impacted, and then you're like, how do we make what you want possible? Right? That is exactly what you would then create a new class schedule. And we've seen schools who do that. You created advisory structures that are more meaningful, that allow that more intimate, the smaller cohorts where you actually know you're the same teacher throughout the whole school year, right? Rather than feeling like you're being passed around to 7 different adults. If you looked at everything through the eyes of the most impacted students, you would have the answers in front of you. Now, with that said, I've talked to a lot of administrators that feel stuck, right? They're like, well, then I got to do the master class and I got these instructional minute requirements. And I don't know if the district's really going to test and punish us later, right? There's all of this baggage that we've carried in the education system for decades. But I just want to say, like, this is about empowerment. We have solutions in front of us, y'all. We can figure this out together, right? If we work in collaboration. And I know of tons of schools around the state that are figuring this out because they are really starting at the center of listening to students and families and working in collaboration with educators.
That's great, thank you. Kamarie, did you want to add to that at all? I know we're keep throwing you hardballs here, but just the chance if you want to add to that.
Can you repeat the question for me?
We were asked if there needs to be a change to middle or high school structure, but why don't we let's go to this question. I think this will get us to it. Miguel Cesar asks, I wonder how can this moment be an opportunity to also challenge some of the assumptions about what school is for that had marginalized students already disconnected from school before the pandemic. Instead of accelerating to back to catch up, could we slow down, reflect on, and get a retake on schools so they serve us?
Yes.
What is school for?
I feel like this one goes a little bit about what I was talking about earlier, especially coming back from a pandemic, returning in school. School, we all know, we go to school to learn. Yes, that is like the ideal, what it's quote unquote for. But I feel like in order to really get like actual results of successful students, I feel like we have to prioritize our mental health. And I'm just gonna keep reiterating that because I feel like that's something that is super like, yes, you whatever, like things that I've heard when I was going to school, like what I want to say, I've heard different like students say, well, when I go to school, I can't really like talk about what happened at home because, you know, teachers are mandated reporters, things like that. So you really have like a whole student going to school with trauma, thinking about things that just happened on their way to school. And then they have to learn about y equals mx plus b. Like that is just so much on a student because it's like, okay, yes, we know we're here to learn about y equals mx plus b, but can you ask me like how my day was? Can you ask me like, do I need to take a walk? Instead of really trying to meet the day-to-day, like the schedule, like we have, I don't know, how long is a class? Like 53 minutes. Like we have to get this done at this time. We have to get this done at this time. I felt like, yes, school is, that is the place for learning, but we really have to kind of like take a step back and step away from the traditional, okay, we have the student here in the seat at 8 a.m. and we're going to go to lunch at this time, but really getting to know the student and really prioritizing their mental health. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but that's exactly what I think. Because yeah, I just feel like mental health and just wellness overall is super kind of pushed to the side. And it shouldn't be, because that takes a toll on a student. And a student is like who they are at home, even when they come to school, and we can't really kind of like overlook that. So yeah.
One thing I wanted to add to at least Mary's question about the aspects of traditional high school, middle school structures that could be changed. California class sizes are quite large. In San Diego, we're looking at 36 kids in secondary classrooms. So it is hard to build a relationship with students when if I have 36 kids in front of me in a 50-minute period, as Kamarie was saying. I don't have, I mean, like if I spend 2 minutes with each child, I've already gone over the time for the period. So part of what would have to change would either be the advisory structure, that you create more smaller groups to do activities with that teacher, get to know each other as a group, or you lower class sizes.
Yeah. And I think this, just connecting that back to the purpose of school, right? We're like, these technical issues that Matthew is bringing up, again, if we really thought what is best, what do students, most impacted students really want? Mental health wouldn't just be seen as, oh, so that you can focus in math class, right? Let's work on your mental health. That would just be the purpose of school. Like part of the purpose of school is everybody graduates with their academic achievements, yes, but they graduated as whole and healthy people, right? I mean, as a new parent, that's what I want for my baby. And that includes knowing like his identity as a Japanese American citizen in a white supremacy culture. Like, I don't want him to have to sacrifice his identity just to get an A in his class, right? I want him to learn about his power as a citizen. I want him to be able to participate in this democracy and shape the future. That should be part of the purpose of school. And we have a track record of that. We just need to bring that back, and we need to make that more of a regular thing across many schools, every school in California.
Mm-hmm. So we got a question, Kamarie, that you mentioned the mental health resolution in LAUSD. And can you elaborate a little bit more on what that was and what came of that?
Yes. So the mental health resolution is literally what it is. It's prioritizing students' mental health. And as I like to say, just the school just giving the students the opportunity to just woo-sa. If I could have named it woo-sa resolution, I would have named it woo-sa. But just giving the students the opportunity and the space that they need, just to really hone into their true selves as a person, and as a human being, and just taking a step back from being a student. Because like I said earlier, it's like this, we wake up, we go, it's like it's a routine. We wake up, go to school, we have to all this baggage that we come to school with. Well, most students go to school with all this baggage, and don't really have a lot of space, because school is our second home. We spend more time at school than I feel like at home, because well, we go to 8, get out at 2, well, how it used to be. We have all these hours at school, but we really don't have a lot of time and space and conversations to really just talk about, like I said, how was our day, do different, I don't know, activities. We can just taking a walk outside, having class outside, just really bringing the student to the world and really just, you know, tapping into that holistic approach about how can we really, I don't know, better like our mentals and our wellness. So like I said, having access to PSWs and other wellness resources and things like that. I just felt it was super important because I felt like it, a lot of students were like, I don't know, they felt, especially like for schools that have wellness centers on their campus, a lot of students, from my experience, would just kind of shy away from not trying to be the one that is seen walking into the wellness center, because they would like probably get clowned because like, what are you walking into the wellness center for? You need help with this, you need help with this, that, and the third. And it's like, I feel like I should bring it to the forefront, having the position that I have, because it's like, we need to normalize walking into the wellness center. We have help, we have free help, we need to go get our free help. So I feel like, yeah, that's exactly why me and other students came up with this resolution, because we need to normalize just woosah.
And students like Kamarie doing that outreach and getting paid for it, right? I'm also seeing folks use ARP funds, ESSER funds to pay students of color who are also financially impacted, right? A double equity win, some folks are calling it. Because how do we have thousands of folks like Kamarie out there, right, doing this work? They're the best messengers to our communities, to other peers. And in order to make that possible, right, let's use some of our expanded learning funds. Let's use some of our federal and state funds to actually get them paid internships to do this work.
Yeah. Going to the mental health question, and this to you, Matthew, talk about what you think teachers are going to need. I mean, when we're going back in person and we're, you know, so much has happened, people have experienced such deep things, and you talked a little bit about this, but what are kind of support our teachers going to need to be able to hold that? What does it look like to come back to school? All different kinds of experiences and trauma have happened. What will you and your peers need support around to be able to hold that?
I think it's been really isolating, even going back to school, because there's all these rules about, like, you know, we can't eat lunch together, for instance, right? Like, so I think time that where teachers are collaborating together on whether it's activities to build relationships, or, I mean, because it can be academic things, but I don't think it only needs to be lesson planning. It can also be coming together to think about how we want to do things differently. I think that we need to be cognizant of the fact that we don't want to do too much at once in terms of like training. Like, I see this constantly where districts are really excited about a certain kind of training, and then it's like constant, they want to pull you out and they want to have you go to this training, and it's like, but I have things I need to do right now. So not being overwhelmed with a bunch of training at once, because quite frankly, this year we had a whole week of training when we went back in person, and I was like, is this really happening right now when I need to be like focusing on what, like, I'm already dealing with the fact that I'm like, I had the vaccine, like, we're gonna do this, and then it's like, oh, by the way, you have a whole week of training in front of you. Like, so that would be my one thought, to just like, training is good, and teachers, absolutely, there's I mean, I'm looking at the question about ethnic studies, and like PD related to anti-racism, ethnic studies absolutely would make what we are teaching students more relevant to them. I just would want to make sure that we're not like heavy focus, especially at the beginning of school, on that kind of training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what you just said goes to Taryn, that fifth element of the team efforts to do systems change. I mean, I think when I say lofty things about that students, families, and teachers should be the designers of their schools, it's that you need the space to work as a team, to figure out what you need and ask the community and the school to meet those needs, right? And the PD will be important, but it might be very important for the teachers to have a say in how and when they get that PD, et cetera. In the same way we want students to have a say about what their needs are and what their wishes are for their schools to look like. Thank you for adding that. I don't know if anyone wants to take that question about ethnic studies and anti-racism PD, where that fits in reimagining schools. I mean, I think you kind of touched on it, Matthew, but does anybody else want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think that it would be a huge missed opportunity if we don't take this year to really go hard on not just ethnic studies as one class. That's not what students are calling for. They're calling for race and culture and language to be seen and affirmed in the entire TK to 12 experience. I mean, and beyond, but let's start there, right? And I've seen these cool examples where folks are really blending like African-American history and math. Like this is possible in not just history, right? But really blending that in throughout all of the teaching and learning practices. Because just remember, in the middle of this pandemic, we also had a racial reckoning, right? Folks are having to grapple with questions about race and having, that we haven't really seen this type of opportunity. I would look at it. This is not new, right? We all know that, but the fact that there is an openness from system leaders and there's a little crack in that wall, we need to push that crack open and normalize conversations about race and culture.
Thank you. So we're ready to go to closing remarks, and I'm going to ask each of us to share one takeaway that you want the audience to go away with. And I'm going to go first and answer this question about how can we make the investments in this reimagining of public schools as community schools sustainable, given that we might have budget cuts in the future. And I'll just say that the proposal on community schools that's going forward is a moment to both take the unusual amounts of money we have now to do that unglamorous work of do this kind of deeper systems and practice and culture change to make it possible for there to be real student voice, family voice, and teacher voice in the designing of schools. And that what we can do now is build that capacity also to integrate those services and supports, figure out what they are, make sure they're responsive to those voices. So part of the proposal is, how do we start building that capacity for the long haul to keep teaching ourselves how to do community schools? So I'll just make that pitch to get everyone behind the community school proposal. And then let me go to Taryn. Give us one takeaway for the audience as we close.
It's just about partnerships and collaboration. We need to move from the me to we. So if you are a person or an organization that has privilege, right, where people listen to you more than others, that you have access to the state superintendent who's coming on next, or the school board member, if you have that kind of privilege and access, open the doors for folks who don't have that access, don't have that voice and power, and partner with them, right? Bring communities in, bring community organizers in who've been doing this work for a long time. And that partnership is what's going to transform things.
Thank you, Taryn. And I'll just say, I just got a note that our final speaker is Superintendent Thurman, and he's running late. So we're gonna do our takeaways. We have as much time as we want for our takeaways. So I'll just add here that for the audience, that the supporting materials that, that you saw from Taryn. And I think what we should do is put together a digestible something about the community schools proposal for people to that they can help advocate for that. All of that will be shared with participants post the water cooler. Okay, so that a bit of business, and then Matthew, can you give us one takeaway? And you have plenty of time.
I don't think I'm long-winded, but I think no, I wish I were. So learning is best done with people, not for them, meaning we should constantly be asking our students and our teachers. That was really a good reminder. What you said, we should be asking our students for student agency, but we should absolutely be asking our teachers as well. What do you need? What do you want? And not making assumptions about what that is, but actually, I mean, taking the time to do the work, to have those conversations, because we're the ones that are ultimately affected, and to have administrators not consult the very people that are being affected by those policies doesn't make sense.
All right, thank you. Okay, Taryn, we did you. Kamarie, what are your final remarks? And you also have plenty of time.
Thank you. My final remarks will obviously be based around the students. Students have invaluable insight on schools, given that we are at school almost 40 hours a week. Our voices and our experiences provide vital feedback and ideas. So I think it begins with changing the narrative and power dynamic that allows schools and Sacramento leaders to make decisions without students leading the conversation. Youth need to be seen as equal partners and as important stakeholders in helping to shape public education. So just continue to include student input and, have youth really forefronted those conversations. Also, kind of going back to what Taryn said, the importance to have that community throughout your high school career and finding that person or people to build a relationship with. I feel like it's super, super vital. So yeah, I don't think I need any more time.
And since we have time before the superintendent comes back, I mean, I would love to hear from the participants too. Like, what's resonating with you? What would you want all of us to come together around? Right? This is gonna take more than any one awesome person, even the state superintendent or Linda Darling-Hammond, right? This is a community of people right here. So if that's possible, Deanna, I would love to hear from some of the participants.
Yeah, if people will put remarks in the question and answer box, please do that. I'll also just add that I think we've heard in community schools that our high schools have got, need a lot of attention and get neglected or passed over. But I will also add to that thinking, and especially in student voice, that I've had experience in working with elementary school students and having them have a voice and being fully involved in designing the needs assessment and the questions for students and the planning process for their community schools under the Healthy Start program. So I just want to say that to the whole universe, that we can have real, genuine student involvement and really ownership and leadership, even down to our elementary school levels. I have a comment from Jessica. I love the outlook that we already have solutions and it's just a matter of working on them. And Patricia says, learning could be fun, but we are often more concerned with tests, scores, assessments, and competition rather than really enjoying the process of learning. I wish we could have schools like that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Kamarie,
Okay.
did you miss taking your standardized test?
That's right.
Your SBAC. Shucks.
Okay, I think that we, do we have the superintendent on deck? I thought I just saw someone.
This is all a ploy to help build up the hype, you all. You know, when you're waiting for Beyonce to come on stage, but they keep bringing something else on board.
All right, I'll just read the next comment. Anecdotally, I know this pandemic has made a lot of teachers reevaluate their lives and leave the classroom. We place too much responsibility on schools to fix systemic issues.
Right.
Yeah. And blaming why it didn't work goes, teachers are to blame. Oh, students are to blame. Oh, families are to blame. We got to stop that.
I think there's also a tension in the path forward right now around accountability, right? And so, I mean, we have folks who are equity or civil rights advocates, and there is a really important role for accountability and oversight. But I think we have to remember, at the expense of who? Is it at the expense of putting pressure on students to take standardized tests or teachers to be measured in their jobs and having to focus so much on testing and the many things that they get, teachers feel pressured to be assessed by, rather than creating that time and space for relationships. So we have to be real with ourselves, or what are the unintended consequences of these different policies we've pushed in the past, No Child Left Behind, right? And then how do we think differently? How do we also reimagine what can accountability look like? Because it's important. What can oversight look like that does not feel paternalistic, right?
Or punitive, yeah.
Or punitive, or push more people out, push more educators out. So yeah. Just as there's a chance to reimagine the school day, I think there's a chance to reimagine what kind of equitable policies and accountability looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Taryn, I think just to second that, it's why so much of the proposal around community schools is for capacity building, because we can say, how much money do you have? And then what are your outcomes, and be accountable for those. But making transformational change is not something we all know how to do. And it's not something that human systems do easily. We're talking about deep cultural change. So supporting the capacity to make that change, really important, and a big part of what we're all proposing here. I'll just read one more comment. From Angelica. Excited we are talking about a transformative culture shift towards listening to community and valuing expertise of students, families, educators, and community working together. This will require strong support for the new skills we have to develop to partner together. Okay, I'm trying to figure out I thought we had.
And I know there's a comment here about internet connectivity and digital devices. I think you heard from Linda, and I'm sure all of us know we are far from getting there. And I think this is also a moment where we should be thinking about access to internet and digital device as a universal right? Like when we talk about reimagining, I know what my Comcast bill is. It's ridiculous. Yeah. That needs to be something we tackle and say no more, right?
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you, Taryn, Matthew, and Kamarie.